The old adage goes, a wipe a day keeps the deep clean away, or something to that effect anyway, and I reckon we should apply this principle to our indoor plants. For those of us with a few plants in our home, it should be a maintenance a week keeps the brown leaves and heartache away. Oh, that doesn't rhyme. Anyway, the point is that indoor plant care is about the little things we do every week or even every day to keep our plants firing on all cylinders. It's useless letting them fester for months and months on our windowsills and then panicking when we realise they're on death's door. So, Houseplant 101 is watering. Any houseplant video on YouTube wouldn't be complete without the presenter making watering plants a confusing matter. But luckily for you, I like to keep it nice and simple. Because it really is when you follow my basic principle, which is to only water your plants when the soil is dry. But how on earth do we know if the soil is dry? By whipping out Mr. Sheffield's #1 affiliate link, the moisture meter, probing your little green misters every week and watering them when the soil reads dry. It's really that simple, and something I've been preaching on this channel for what must feel like millennia to my long-suffering subscribers, but you really can't go wrong. If you've not got a moisture meter, then you can of course use your fingers, but I find mine to be wholly unreliable. My fingers tell me it's dry, but the meter tells me it's wet. A confusion that will kill a plant in no time. If I've somehow convinced you need one, then check out my Amazon store linked in the description. So yes, getting the watering right is the quickest way to becoming the hero of your house. Get it wrong and things like root rot can start to take hold, and your plants will start to plan a coup behind your back to get rid of you. And who can blame them? Now, our plants need their Weetabix just as much as you and me, so it's a great idea to be giving them some food to keep their energy levels up to make full use of the sunlight coming into your home. But don't literally give them Weetabix, they're not really a fan. I give mine Houseplant Focus by Growth Technology every time I water, and I've not had too many complaints. Every time you water, Mr. Sheffield? That's far too much, you donut. Calm down now, kid, let me explain. You see, I'm not the sharpest knife in the kitchen, and I don't mind admitting it, and to keep it as simple as possible and to make sure I don't forget when I fertilise what last, I add a diluted amount of feed to every watering can I make up. The instructions say to add a teaspoon to every litre of water every 2 weeks, so I add half a teaspoon every time I water because I tend to need to water my green pals once a week. Hopefully I got my maths correct. Anyway, it just takes the stress away of having to remember what I did a week ago. I can barely remember what I did 10 minutes ago, so it's the best way, honestly. Whilst I'm lovingly watering my plants, I always use that as an opportunity to give them a little look over. A checkup, so to speak. Is there any yellowing or browning of the leaves? If there is, then I usually trim them out, after I've had a little cry, of course. If it's just a leaf here or there, then I try not to panic too much. It's just par for the course for an indoor plant. Leaves age, they turn yellow and fall off. Normal. In fact, I tend to just leave yellowing leaves to do their thing until they eventually fall off by themselves. If the whole plant is turning yellow though, then something's up that I need to fix. No, not that, you savage. I mean checking the roots and whatnot. Not everything needs to go in the bin. Anyway, a regular checkup really does keep the doctor away. Now, this next tip is actually something I should do more often than I actually do, but I add it to the mix anyway. Cleaning. Yes, I know, sitting there cleaning each of our plants' leaves individually really is the last thing we want to be doing, and I can't say I always keep on top of it as much as I should, but it sure does pay off in the long run. Big leaf monsters like monsteras and calophyas are magnets for flying bits of dead skin and toenails. And who wants a thick coating of that on their collection? Whoa, your plants don't, that's who. Molly the Monster seems to have a constant coating of the grey stuff even though I clean her off on a semi-regular basis. Maybe that says a bit too much about my house and the people that live in it though. Anywho, if you can't be bothered to wipe the leaves every week, and I don't blame you by the way, then a good little hack is to take them outside every month or so and give them a good spray down. They'll photosynthesize much easier and will thank you with extra lush leaves, plus little terrors like spider mites and thrips will have a hard time hanging out with all that extra cleaning. Speaking of photosynthesis, let's talk about rotation. Yeah, let's talk about how in one video you say to rotate your plants every 30 seconds and then in the next you say it's the worst thing since sliced bread. Feisty little aren't you? Rotating is the best thing since sliced bread for most plants. Those that are bushy. We're talking trads, calophyas and spider plants, etc. Lets all sides see the light and all the even growth that it brings. For the suckers that are climbing up planks of wood or moss bowls like Philodendron, Pothos and Monstera, rotation ain't gonna work out so well. They'll be twisting and shouting for you to stop it. Look at this Monstera Adansonia and this treleaf trellis. She wouldn't know if she was coming or going if I rotated her all the time, bless her. And by the way, isn't this trellis a beautiful thing? It's made by Treleaf, like I say, and the details in the description. Well worth a look. Now, rotating applies to those beasts that sit under your grow lights too. Obviously, grow lights don't move around like the sun, so a cheeky little rotate every once in a while will give you much more even growth. I do this to mind the penthes every other day because one half tends to sit in good light and the other in darkness. Not a great look for a specimen that craves the light as much as this guy. Now, I could be really annoying and say that I check the roots of my plants every week to make sure they're not root bound, but honestly, only a mad person would do that. Pulling their trousers down and giving everything an inspection is something I only really do once a year. Really? I've not seen you check that Aglaonema since you bought it 3 years ago, Sonny. You again? Will you just be quiet? As I was saying, I don't get everything out and make a mess every week, but I do like to have a look at the bottom to see if anything cheeky is poking out of the drainage holes. If roots are starting to show themselves, then it's a safe bet that things are getting a little crowded inside and might need rehoming into a bigger space. If nothing is rearing its ugly head, then happy days. No extra work for me that week. I mentioned the troubles I've been having with my Philodendron melanocrisis not unfurling its leaves properly in a recent video, and most of the feedback seemed to be that it was struggling with low humidity. And this makes perfect sense now that I think about it. This issue plagues me most in winter with the central heating on and all that dry air swirling around. So I'm now in the habit of checking for any leaves that are struggling to unfurl and giving them a spritz with my trusty spray bottle to help them along. An annoying but necessary evil, my plant friend, when you have fussy plants in your collection. I tell you, if the melanocrisis doesn't start behaving properly this year, he's destined only for one place. I've had enough. This next little tip is plant gold, my plant friend, and will make or break your plant. I mentioned watering earlier, and something I always monitor is how quickly the water drains through the soil. But you bottom water, Mr. Sheffield. Jeez, why are you still here? Yes, I bottom water about 80% of the time, okay? I still top water a few. Now, I don't want to hear from you again. When I do top water, I want to see that the water is going through the soil quickly. If it's lingering too long on top, it can only mean one thing, that the soil is no good. It's either so old it's become hydrophobic, or it's too dense and not allowing water to run through freely. Either way, this will lead to unhappy roots. I recommend changing it to something like Universal Potting Mix by Cybotanica. Check out this Philodendron New Red I've got sitting on this living room table. Poor fella, isn't he? He's got himself into this weird shape because he's desperately trying to get some of that light from the window, and his dad's stuck in behind this wall. To be honest, I find him kind of endearing and I wouldn't have him any other way, even if he might hate me for what I've done to him. So yes, if you've got a leaning plonker like this in your home, then he's not getting enough light, my plant friend. So what to do about this fella doing the twist and shout? It's pretty simple, I guess. Move him to a spot where he's getting not blocked off by a wall. Genius, eh? The trouble is though that he now fits this space perfectly, and moving him anywhere else in the house makes him look like the awkward guy at the party. So it's too late for him basically. He's staying where he is. And by the way, check out the leaves on this bad boy. I think this is by design, it's in his name after all, and I think it looks dead interesting. Let me know what you think. Colouring of leaves is actually a pretty good sign that your leafy pals aren't getting the light they deserve. A lack of colour, that is. Take this coleus of mine I've got hanging out on my kitchen windowsill. When in rude health, this gal is multicoloured and quite the sight to behold. The deep red centre and green border of the leaves are almost good enough to eat. Almost, I said. Anyway, you might be wondering why I'm bleating on about this when she's living right next to my window. Well, the coleus is a plant that seems to suffer most during winter. Mine was suffering so much that I lopped off all her hair for the Sheffies over on Patreon until she ended up looking like Goldilocks just like her father. The lack of light in good old Sheffield during the winter made her foliage all one-dimensional, and we all know she's got more about her than that. This theory applies to plants with white bits in the leaves too. The science says that because these bits aren't green, they lack the full photosynthesizing potential of the rest of the leaf, so the whole thing needs tons of light to compensate. So if you've got a plant that is reverting back to all green, put her somewhere brighter. Check out this little lady here, all legs, which is fine if you are actually a little lady, but not so much if you're a plant. I mean, they look a bit silly stood up on tippy toes showing everyone their legs, don't they? The reason this is happening to this lass and every other lass that displays this kind of behaviour is simple: lack of light. Most of you know I complain about the light in my home all the time, and for that I can only apologise. But you should hear what my plants have got to say when I'm not around. Really not happy with their lot in life. Anyway, the science is pretty simple. They're not getting their vitamin D and so stretch themselves in search of the good stuff until they end up looking like this. The remedy is pretty simple though. Move her nearer to the window. Genius. Or stick a Sansi grow light over her. Link in the description. By the way, all these symptoms plus many more are listed in my free plant problems troubleshooting handbook that you can download for free by following the link in the description to this video. It's a nifty guide for when something naughty rears its ugly head with your plants like leaf drop, wilting or brown leaves, and tells you the main causes and how to fix it. Highly recommended to keep on your phone, so go check it out. So I was mooching around the house looking for examples of my little darlings in distress to show you in this video, and lo and behold, I found the worst kind. Check out Sally the snake plant here. Now, I'm fond of Sally because she was one of the first plants me and Mrs. Sheffield bought together, so she's been with us at least a decade. But she's in distress and it's all my fault. There are two things you'll straight away notice about her. One is that the spot she gets to call home is a good 3 meters away from the nearest window, and two, she has this unsightly floppy leaf that is on death's door, and the two are linked. She's got such a puny view of the sky that she's having a hard time getting rid of the moisture in her soil, and her dummy father has been giving her a drink without checking the soil properly. But Mr. Sheffield, you always bleat on about checking the soil before watering. Why don't you practice what you preach? Yeah, I've got no defence to be honest. Let's just call this an honest oversight, okay? Well, the lesson I've learned is that when a little diva is living in a not so bright spot, you really have to watch your watering, because mushy bits and pieces like this tends to happen. Sally will bounce back, no doubt. It's just one leaf after all. The question is, will she forgive me? The salt and pepper to this problem of overwatering a light-deprived plant is mouldy soil. You can see some of this happening with my long-suffering Syngonium red arrow. Now, ficus plants are little fellas that seem to suffer the most serious case of seasonal affective disorder, at least where I live anyway. Mine happily sends out new leaves all summer long at a rate of about 1 in every 2 weeks or so, but come winter, when the sun comes out to say hello for only 8 hours a day, that completely stops. We're talking cold turkey, nada. I can see the point where the new leaf wants to come out to say hello, but it just sits there in stasis until mid-spring, and it's all to do with light. To help with this, I could stick a grow light over him, but honestly there's just no space for him under any of my grow lights, so I'll just have to grin and bear it. To really see the difference a cheeky grow light can make, check out this Philodendron melanocrisis and compare him to his brother. We'll call him Bob and his brother Jack. It might surprise you to learn that these guys are actually twins, born at exactly the same time from their now dearly departed mother. At the beginning of last winter, there was a kind of sliding doors moment for each of our friends, with Bob plonked on this fireplace mantle a good couple of meters from the window, and Jack given the best chance in life under this grow light on this cabinet. I think you can see the difference is made with Bob all Danny DeVito and Jack all Arnold Schwarzenegger. The upshot of this little random story is to say that if you're not seeing the rapid growth you'd like from your little fella, then chances are he's not getting enough of the good stuff. Let me introduce you to Polly, the effervescent peace lily with a single white flower glimmering in the light. We all know this isn't always the case with peace lilies though, don't we? Now to me it seems there is no rhyme or reason for them to flower when they do. One year she won't flower all summer and then randomly pops one out in the depths of winter, and then the next year it's the other way around. But to give her the best chance of showing off her cleavage, she needs a ton of light, my plant friend, and that's what I try to do. And this goes for all flowering plants. If you're waiting for your orchid to sprout a new flower spike and it's been months, move him next to the window where you can see plenty of the sky. A flowering plant sat glumly not doing anything is a sure sign she's light deprived. So it seems like we're doing a full tour of Mr. Sheffield's plant nasties in this video, and the next poor sucker to feature is Andy the Angry Anthurium. Andy's angry because at the end of last summer I moved him from this bench in front of the window to this fireplace mantle well away from the window, and this is what happened. Not a happy bunny, is he, our Andy? He went from medium light to low light in the blink of an eye, and to show me his displeasure he did this to his leaves. He cut off his nose to spite his face, or something. Anyway, anything funny going on with the leaves like browning, fading or yellowing sure can be a sign that things are not right with the light. But why, Mr. Sheffield? A plant sat in the dark can't get rid of the moisture in the soil, so the roots become unhappy, and unhappy roots normally show themselves through dodgy leaf shenanigans. Look, it's happening to Susie, my spider plant here. Not enough sun high up on this shelf and brown tips aplenty. This one might be something you've not considered before, but I've got the evidence to show you that it's a real thing. You'll like this one. So this is Mrs. Sheffield's favourite plant in the house, Damien the Devil's Ivy. She loves the way it drapes around the dining room picture rail, and I'm a big fan too. You'll notice though that one stem trails towards the window and the other one has been forced to trail away from the window against its will. And look at this stem compared to this stem. This stem is as beefy as Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson himself, and this one is as lame as Kevin Hart. Don't get me wrong, I like Kevin Hart, he's just kinda small compared to The Rock. Anyway, isn't this the perfect illustration of just what a difference good light can make to the stems on the same plant? So if you've got a little mister with puny arms and legs that are only getting even punier, then a lack of light is most likely why. This isn't just a problem with stems either. Bianca, my Philodendron Brazil, has been kind enough to show us the next problem that haunts tons of plants the world over in low light, including a bunch in your home no doubt. Bianca is at least 2 meters from the window, and you might think I'm about to refer to her loss of variegation, but no, she's got a bigger problem. Yes, you guessed it, puny leaves. Check out the difference in leaf size at the bottom of the plant to the top. The bottom leaves tell a story of a happy plant living her best life with the grower and all that they have to offer, and the top leaves tell a story of misery with her new owner in his dark and damp home. So yes, leaves getting progressively smaller is a dead giveaway of low light. Sometimes a plant just looks plain old sad, almost malnourished from a lack of vitamin D, and like they want to give up the ghost. My Chinese money plant is the perfect example. Nothing particularly striking showing itself like browning, leaning or small leaves, but just a glum look like he's not happy with his lot in life. If a plant in your home is looking miserable, even though there doesn't appear to be major issues, a good way to get more exuberance out of him is to put him somewhere brighter. You should see a big change in no time. Light really is the thing that makes everyone happy. Let's say you've got a plant that has outgrown the pot it lives in. You can tell because your Columbo senses are telling you that the pot is bulging and the roots are coming out of the bottom of the pot. It's time for a repot then, so you grab all your gear, pull his trousers down and set about settling him into his new, bigger, more luxurious home. You're using the right soil from Cybertanica, you've got a pot with drainage holes, and you press everything nicely into place like the plant whisperer you are. Everything is set. Now what about watering? Should you give your plant a drink of good old H2O or not? A conundrum I'm sure you've been battling with, and I bet you've heard lots of contradicting advice out there about this. There are 2 schools of thought here. You either give your plant a good drink or let the roots settle into its new surroundings for a week before giving it its first drink. Well, my plant friend, you absolutely do need to give your plant a drink of water straight after repotting. In fact, you need to give your plant a thorough drowning so that every cubic centimetre of soil is fully saturated. But what about if you only watered the plant yesterday, Mr. Sheffield? Surely giving the roots yet more water will damage the roots. Ah yes, this is where the common misconception lies, and really it's completely understandable. We hear about the horrors of overwatering all the time and become plant hypochondriacs when it comes to watering our green buddies. But forget all that. Even if you've just watered your plant, even an hour before, you should still water in your newly repotted plant. And that's the key term, watering in. Let's peel the onion a bit more. Now, I'm a keen Gardener's World fan, and I always used to hear the gardening wizard himself, Monty Don, talk about watering in his plants while planting them in his beds. And yes, that's exactly how I spend my Friday nights these days. Forget the pub, I need my weekly fix of gardening telly. Anyway, I didn't really get what he meant by watering watering in. I just assumed he meant giving the plant a wee drink of water to hydrate the roots. But there's more to it, and I only realised this when he explained it in an episode a couple of years ago, and it's super important for plant health. After he finished putting the plant in a bed, he grabbed a massive watering can filled to the brim with water and poured it all directly onto the root ball. No hesitation, no using a rose to fan it over a wide area or anything, just boom, all poured in one go right next to the roots, no messing around. And he does this all the time. As he did that, he explained that watering in is all about settling the soil around the roots, eliminating air pockets and providing moisture for the roots to establish themselves in a new home. It's the settling the soil around the roots, eliminating air pockets, that is the vital part. Without doing this, your plant is going to suffer, my plant friend. No amount of shaking or tapping is going to displace the excess air in the pot around the roots. Only water will do this. You'll have no doubt noticed that when you do give water to your plant after repotting, the soil level always drops and there are usually depressions in certain areas. This is the water doing its magic by displacing the air and making sure all the roots have soil clung to them. This is exactly the perfect start to life you need to give your green buddy. But what about the risk of overwatering because you only watered the plant yesterday? Trust me, this really isn't an issue. You will not kill your plant by giving it a drink twice in quick succession, and this applies to any plant. Ficus, monstera, succulent, cacti, you name it. Overwatering is much more about the prolonged saturation of soil over a long period of time that deprives the roots of oxygen and invites root-rotting bacteria to take hold. They can most definitely handle being given another drink the next day as a one-off. Have no fear, young apprentice. So whenever I repot a plant, I always give the soil a thorough drink until water is freely coming out of the drainage holes. And I normally use a whole 1 litre watering can to get the job done. Once you've decided you've got to finally get round to repotting that plant you've been ignoring, do you ever find that the root ball you are dealing with is rock hard? This is a sure sign the soil is extremely compact, and this is really bad for root health. They need oxygen to breathe after all, just like you and me. This problem always seems to happen to my ripple jade here. The problem is I leave it a little too long in between watering and the soil becomes compact and hydrophobic. I guess I'm not the doting parent I claim to be after all. If you're not familiar with the term hydrophobic, it just means the soil becomes so dry that it repels water. It basically means it can be very tricky to hydrate it again. Pouring water over the top a couple of times just won't cut it. Water will skid off the top and run down the sides easily, and there will still be dry patches in the middle of the root ball. You can be there all day pouring water over the top, but nothing can penetrate the middle. The answer to this then, my plant friend, is to give him a bath. Sounds weird, I know, but it's the only way to soften everything up and make him more willing to take water on. So yes, pull his trousers down and stick all his private parts in a bucket or sink of water. You'll see him do lots of little farts in the water as the air is displaced, and this is when you know it's working. Leave him to sit there for a good hour or so until everything is fully drenched. After a while, things should start to loosen up, and the next time you go to water him, it won't be so much of a challenge. And again, don't worry about overwatering. This won't cause it. Having him living in a murky bath every day will. Frequency, my plant friend, and not volume. A slight change of direction now. Getting great lights to your plant should be a houseplant goal 101. Without great light, we ain't getting great plants. There's no getting around that, my plant friend. Now, last year I bought myself a light meter so I could find out once and for all just how good the various spots in my house were for my plants, and honestly I was shocked. I mean, I get that if we keep our green buddies locked in the basement, they're not going to be living their best lives, but I was shocked at just how much of a difference the little details can make. Apparently, keeping a plant on a shelving unit right next to the window won't even be good enough if it's not facing the right direction. And this is because those suckers on that shelving unit can't get a decent view of the sky. This is what plants want, a view of the sky. This is even a problem when it comes to where they sit next to one another. Sit a vertically challenged individual next to a giant and the foot candle reading for the little guy goes way down. It will be like Kevin Hart trying to get some vitamin D with the rock lingering over him. Most of the light from the sky is going to be blocked by the behemoth. So grouping a bunch of your green buddies all close together on a windowsill does not mean they're all going to get the same light. Chances are the rocks of this world are going to get the lion's share. So what can we do about this? Well, my plant friend, the solution is as simple as it is brilliant. Well, in my book anyway. To channel your inner Josh Groban and raise them up. I've started doing this more and more recently and it makes a surprisingly big difference. Sit a little guy on top of another upside down pot and he stands half a chance of getting the light he needs, which is important when he's part of a larger crowd. He won't need to stand on tippy toes so much and stretch himself out and become a leggy mess. And you can get pretty creative too, the world is your oyster. You can use decorative pots, retro food tins, crates, anything that will create a platform and make your living room look home and garden trendy. This even works with grow lights too. Check out my little console table in my living room that I've dedicated to plants. I know, Mrs. Sheffel thinks I'm crazy too, but I think it adds something charming to this corner of the room. Obviously, I've got a Sansi grow light hanging over the top, but I was finding that the plants towards the back of the table weren't getting the light they deserve, so I raised them up with plant pots that weren't in use, and now everyone's happy. Let me know in the comments the things you use to make your plant collection sing. I need the inspiration. My variegated rubber plant here has a problem. Look at him, his lower limbs have gone all gangrene, the poor fella. I just hope it's not catching, to me or my plants. Anyway, I noticed this in the middle of filming my recent plant ranking video and it caught me by surprise because my ficus plants don't tend to go yellow on me and I've not noticed it before. We'll go straight into S-class. Just noticed a couple of yellowing leaves there, which is a bit odd. Doesn't normally happen with this plant. So this fella clearly has an issue that needs sorting, so we're going to do that together in this video. Now, this all could just be a false alarm because not every yellowing leaf has a dark side. I mean, it'd be unreasonable for me to expect to hold on to every single molecule of hair on my head my entire life, and the same is true for plants. Sort of. Plants shed older leaves and going yellow is part of the process. So keep this in mind before you run around the room panicking and even throw yours in the bin. Do the same checks I'll do in this video, but keep in mind that it could just be part of the natural aging process. So do I think this is what's happening to our ficus here? To be honest, maybe not, because I've got a few ficus plants in the house. I've got a big green one there. I've not really known them to shed leaves in this fashion before. 3 leaves going yellow at the same time is a bit unusual for ficus plants in my house, so I do suspect something naughty might be happening. The most sinister of which is pests. The last thing you want is pests on your plant. 1, because it will make your little fella sick, and 2, because it risks spreading to your entire collection, which would be a disaster of epic proportions. Now, fungus gnats shouldn't be an issue for yellowing leaves like this. They just tend to be a massive pain in the bum rather than a threat to the plant's health, unless there are tons in the soil munching away at the roots. Again, unlikely for a plant as established as this. Sap-sucking suckers like spider mites, thrips and mealybugs are far more likely. So I've already had a little look for pests on this plant and I've not seen anything. So what I've done, I've checked the underside of all the leaves and especially where the petiole meets the stem, and I've checked for very fine webbing. That'll be an indication of spider mites. I've also looked on the front and on the back, especially of all the leaves, especially at the bottom where the yellowing is. For any like little specks, black specks or golden colour specks, that'll be an indication of spider mites and thrips as well. And I've also checked for little white blobs of cotton. That's a bit more obvious to see, especially on a ficus plant because it's not so bushy. But little blobs of cotton in the crevices normally, that's where they'd be hiding. That'd be an indication of mealybugs. Again, I can't see anything like that, especially at the base. And also, there's no mottling of the leaves. Even on the yellow ones, that one yellow one that's fallen off, there's not especially any mottling of the leaves, which would indicate that an insect has been sucking the sap. Pests are not an issue, I'm ruling that one out. The next thing I want to rule out is disease. Yeah, plants get disease just as much as you and me, my plant friend. And once they do, it can really bring it down quick. Luckily, the symptoms for things like mould, powdery mildew and leaf spot are pretty easy to spot. And the fact that the issue isn't more widespread at the top kind of indicates to me that it's not really a disease. I don't think it is anyway. The browning on the edge of the leaves, the yellowing leaves, is a little bit suspect, maybe a sign of like leaf spot or something, or brown spot on the leaves. But my hunch is that it's just the yellowing leaf just slowly dying off and turning brown and then falling off the plant. So I don't think a disease is an issue with this guy. The best thing to do next is to pay close attention to where your little fella is spending his days. I'm talking about the sun here, too much sun. Leaving a sensitive plant to fry in the midday sun will cause sunburn of epic proportions and he really won't forgive you. So as you can see, it's a rare sunny day here in Sheffield and you can see the sun rays are beaming onto this plant. I don't think that's an issue for ficus plants. I think ficus plants can tolerate some direct sun, especially morning sun. They might struggle if you chuck them on a south-facing window to kind of get burnt in sun all day long. But for morning sun, I don't think it's an issue. Plus the fact that the rest of the foliage is healthy. There's no fading or anything on any of the leaves apart from the 3 bottom leaves. So I don't think it's an issue with too much sun for this plant. It's not just too much of a good thing that can cause problems. Too little of a good thing can, or something. Anyway, I find this quite often with my bushy plants. My mixed pothos planter, for example, is a bushy fella, and I often find dying leaves in the middle that I have to clean up. Why? Because the sun is not getting into the middle of the plant, so the leaves that are sat in the dark die off. It could of course be a localized light issue with the 3 bottom leaves that have gone yellow, not seeing enough light, because a bit of a tall plant with lots of leaves, so maybe that's casting a shadow on the lower leaves and they just kind of given way and died off. Especially as this is a bit of a crowded spot as well, maybe the light is getting blocked off with surrounding plants, but I'm not too convinced that that is the problem because the leaves are still quite firm, they're not really faded, they just kind of went straight to yellow and then died off. So I don't think it's a lack of light that is the issue. This next part of the diagnosing process will involve a bit of soul searching. Am I killing my plant with kindness? And I have to be truthful with myself here. Am I watering my plant every other day thinking it's exactly what he wants? Because it's really not. Living in a swamp I've created for him would be the quickest way to make his private parts go mouldy and his limbs turn a funny colour. I'd be very surprised if this was an overwatering issue, but I do have my trusty moisture meter on hand. So I'm going to give it a quick probe and see how wet the soil is. I don't think it's wet. So this is reading dry. So I only gave this a water 4 days ago, something like that, and it's already reading dry. So it's not an issue with overwatering, plus the fact that the issue isn't more widespread than just those 3 leaves at the bottom kind of suggests to me that it's not a plant living in a swamp. It could be that I'm just not giving my ficus friend here enough water, and this is certainly more likely than the watering too much scenario. You see, I'm a bit of a meanie when it comes to watering, and I tend to treat my plants mean and keep them keen. Basically, that means I only hydrate them when they're desperate. I say mean, but to be honest, it's more out of laziness. It takes a long time to go around everyone to give them their drink. So this plant is clearly struggling from a lack of water because when I probed it, it read 1 on the moisture meter, which is the lowest kind of moisture reading that you can have, obviously. But I don't think it's an issue of me just not giving it enough water because I did water it 4 days ago and it's already dry. Plus the fact that the leaves are still firm and erect and pointing upwards, which is what you want really with a ficus plant. The lower leaves do tend to sag a little bit, but as long as the top ones, top half of the plant, are all pointing kind of in an upwards direction, then you're fine. It doesn't kind of indicate that it's an underwatering problem. So I think the fact that the soil is dry and I only watered it 4 days ago points to another problem. I've often said on this channel that plants need just 3 things to thrive: light, water and nutrients. Get those things right and we're well on our way to a happy mutual relationship. Now, I've discounted the first 2, so I think it's time we looked at nutrients. A lack of nitrogen for our ficus friend here could indeed make him lose his colour. In my experience though, ficus plants don't tend to be heavy feeders. I've not known them to throw their dummy out the pram when they don't get their monthly meal or whatever. Plus, I know for a fact I am on top of my fertilising. How can I be so sure? Because I add Houseplant Focus to every single watering can I make up. But surely that's too much, right? Not with the little and often approach of giving a diluted dose to every single watering can. And I'm pretty sure my maths does add up, so I'm sure it's not a lack of fertiliser issue. But that doesn't mean the issue is not to do with nutrients. A root-bound plant will have trouble accessing the nutrients I diligently give him, so the next stage is to check out his private parts. So like I say, the fact that I have to give this plant water every few days does suggest to me that it is probably root-bound. That's my hunch anyway. But root-boundedness isn't the only problem affecting plant roots. We need to look for things like rot as well. So we'll look for both. So let's get it out of the pot and have a look. So we need always a good idea. Whoops, lacquer going all over my floor. I've got a layer of lacquer on the top, just for decoration really. But if we just get rid of that lacquer, in fact, make it easier to deal with. So if we look at the bottom of the pot, you can see that this plant has lots of roots coming out of the holes at the bottom of the pot, which suggests that it might be root bound in here. But let's have a proper look. Let's try and get this out of the pot successfully. So the soil is very dry on top. Okay. Yep, that feels like a very dense mat of roots in here with not much soil. Let's just shake off some of the excess so it doesn't go all over my floor. Lots of roots at the bottom, feels very, very dense actually. So this guy could do with a repot. Now, the sniff test. Doesn't smell like anything's rotten in here, which is good. And the roots are a nice colour, kind of what you want to see from a ficus plant root system. No black as far as I can see. So the next stage for this plant is to give it a repot. Now that I've solved the mystery and given our ficus friend a bit more room to spread his legs, I just need to make sure he's getting the light he needs to thrive and blossom into the beautiful specimen I know he can. If your houseplants are constantly dying, then it could be because you're not giving it enough dark, not cutting the flowers off, forgetting about these, or a few other things that we'll cover in this video. Sounds weird, I know, but these are some of the things that are stopping your plants from thriving, but after watching this, you'll be well on your way to having the best plants in the neighbourhood. So, alocasias. If you have any, then you'll know about how much of a pain they can be. Plus, how beautiful they are, of course. I think they can hear me recording this. I've slowly been increasing the numbers in my house at the same rate I've slowly been losing my sanity. They're weird and wacky, and every now and then they produce these weird looking things. These are flowers, you know, and the best thing you can do is to get your best choppers out and cut them down to Sheffield Town. But surely that's blasphemy, Mr. Sheffield. Flowers are precious things and should be protected against your fat fingers at all costs. Well, it turns out not so much. I've shown this weird little thing on the channel before because I wasn't sure what it was, and lots of folks told me in the comments that it was a flower and I should lob it off. And I did. I've since done a bit of reading, and it turns out that the plant puts all its energy into the bud and slows down leaf production. And they never amount to much. Certainly not something I'll be giving to Mrs. Sheffield on Valentine's Day anyway. So my Alocasia Frydek, which is a stunning plant I must add, grew one of these alien things, and it took an ice age. In the meantime, the rest of the factory closed down, all the workers went home, and I didn't get to see a new leaf on the production line for weeks. Well, I chopped it down for a recent video I released on Patreon, and lo and behold, the workers are back and new leaves are now starting to emerge on the shop floor. So I thank my viewers for this tip. It's made my alocasias much happier. In return, I've created a free plant troubleshooting handbook that you can download by following the link in the description. It'll help a ton when something rears its ugly head on your plant. Check it out. So what about peace lilies then? Should we be cutting these down at first sight too? Well, lots of people do, even if they are revered for their blooms the world over. One, because they're not keen on how the flowers look, and two, because of how annoying that pollen is that sits in the centre of the flower. But cutting the flowers off does allow the plant to focus its energy on foliage growth, so if you want a big bushy plant with a thick gorgeous mane, then cutting them off could be the way to go. It depends how much you like the blooms. Just don't come after me if you cut them all off and you decide it looks hideous. I featured this funny looking guy in a video I released on the channel not long ago. This is Phil, my philodendron new red, and well, just look at him. He's got himself into a bit of a mess because the light he craves is hiding behind that wall he sits behind. But that's a story for another day, and one I talk about in the video linked in the top right. He's starring again in this new video because his dark story will serve as a stark warning about a hidden killer that is potentially wreaking havoc among your plants. You see, I bought this guy as a wee bubba from Lidl about 2 years ago. He was small enough to hold comfortably in the palm of my hand. He's now grown to this beastly size, and this is a problem. Forget how dishevelled he looks today, he actually ended up falling on the floor because of how lopsided he was. Instead, have a close look at his girthy stems at the base. And look what is apparently strangling them. Yes, a clip that was originally used to support Phil onto his Zimmer frame that he's now busting out of like Arnold Schwarzenegger busting out of his tiny t-shirt. You see, these stems were once not so girthy when he was only a baby. Clips like this are something we often forget about, and as time slips by and we get older with our plants, these clips have potential to strangle our beloved plant stems in secret. It's why the advice is to not tie string too tight to the stem when you're tying it to a support. You always want that extra room in the trousers around the waist for life's extravagances, so it's well worth having a look around your collection, particularly the ones you've had since they were kids. Coming up, I talk about why you should keep your plants in the dark and the dangers of repotting too soon, but first, let's talk about something that will make your plants thrive and save you some money too. When I pull the trousers down to most of my plants, you'll notice that they all have something in common. The roots are all located near the bottom of the pot and not circling around all over the gaff. This isn't by accident, my plant friend, no. It's a consequence of how I water, and I recommend you do the same. Most folks will grab a plant, take it over to the sink and pour water over the top multiple times in the hopes of getting the middle wet. The problem is, it's difficult to get the water to penetrate the middle like this. Water tends to skip off the top and down the sides. Not always, of course, but if the soil is particularly dry, this tends to happen. What I do instead is pop the plant out of the pot, fill about a third of the volume of the pot with water and sit it back down. The water will then slowly wick up through the soil and your plant's roots will be evenly watered and you'll have used much less water in the process. Win! I often say that plants need just 3 things to thrive: light, water and nutrients. I'd put light and water above nutrients because without those we really aren't showing off our plants to our friends and family. We're showing off tombs instead. We all know about the pitfalls of overwatering, don't we? Lots of us have unwittingly killed our plants with kindness, including yours truly of course, but it's a little known fact that this also applies to light. And I'm not talking about direct sun either. Light is the thing that makes a Calathea bushy, a monstera blessed with big fenestrated leaves, and a pitcher plant surrounded by tons of meat-eating traps, so we all know we need to give them as much light as we can. And if we can't do that, then slap a grow light over their heads. And the more the merrier, right? Why not keep that grow light on for as long as possible? All day and all night, right?
Our survey said...
It turns out plants need their rest and recuperation just as much as you and me, my plant friend, and it's all to do with photosynthesis and respiration. Without getting too technical, plants perform photosynthesis during the day using light to convert carbon dioxide and water into glucose, and at night they primarily undergo respiration, converting the stored glucose into energy. It's the plant's internal clock that regulates this process based on a 24-hour cycle of light and dark. Without the dark, their rhythm is all messed up, and I'm not talking about their moves like Jagger. So don't be tempted to leave the light on all night and let sunlight do the work during the day. Your plant will look like they've been up all night dancing. Okay, so what about places like Norway and Alaska where the sun never sets during the summer? Plants there aren't on the fritz, are they? True, but you don't see many tropical plants there either. And the plants that are there have adapted to cope with the extended periods of light so they can go on about their business despite the unusual light conditions. I would be curious to know how tropical plants fare indoors though, so if you're from that part of the world or similar, then please leave it in the comments. So the question is, how can you tell when your plant has actually kicked the bucket? Because plants like alocasia have this annoying habit of going dormant during winter, and I'm pretty sure I've thrown out some plants that were actually still alive. I'm persevering with this guy because the bulb is still firm. This is the key for plants that grow from bulbs or rhizomes like alocasia, calafea or peace lily. If all the foliage is gone, hunt for the bulbs in the soil, and if they still feel firm and not mushy, then you're probably still in the game. But what about those plants that have stems and not bulbs? The trick here is to scrape some of the bark off the stem and look for green. Not too much mind. Green means go in this case. Black means death and your plant is toast, unfortunately. The trick, my plant friend, is to get to your plant before it's too late. Easier said than done, I know, but it's the difference between saying a prayer and singing hallelujah. Get there too late and there's nothing you can do. Make the decision early and you can lob its head off and start again. That's right, lob it off and start again as the popular song goes. I've started again with many a plant, and most of the time the cutting comes out nicer than the original plant. My hunch is that it gets to start its young life in your home with all that has to offer, so it gets used to its lot in life and flourishes. That's instead of being plucked from a lovely bright warm nursery and plonked into your much darker home. This little Ficus elastica ruby is a cutting from a now dearly departed mother. You know, the one I was scraping the bark off not long ago. It turns out she was well on her way out, but before I let her go I chopped her head off and started again. And look at how her offspring is faring, much happier. Have you got a tall, lanky plant that you know you need to prune but you're terrified you'll kill it? What about that big bushy overgrown calafea that is starting to look a mess? No idea where to start? Well, my plant friend, I've got your back because I'm going to show you everything you need to know to prune your plant like a pro. From Monstera to Pothos to Calafea to snake plant, I've got all the plants covered, plus all the questions you've always asked yourself, like how, when and where to prune. So there's a bunch of reasons why you should prune your plant, but my favourite one is that it gets your little mister all fired up. Cutting back the stems of a Tradescantia or thinning out the leaves of a peace lily encourages more vigorous growth, so you're actually doing it a favour. In lots of plants, cutting a stem even results in 2 new growth points emerging, so it's a great hack to bush it out. The jade plant is the perfect example of this. So I've got with me here my larger jade that I keep on my east-facing windowsill there, so it gets lots of light. But as you can see, he's a very handsome bushy fellow, isn't he? And the reason for that is because I regularly prune him back. So as you can see with this jade here, this stem here, there's a longer stem here, and I made a previous cut right there, and then it's produced 2 new stems. That always happens with a jade, pretty much without fail. So if you were to go through this plant, you would always see where I made the cut there, and then 2 new branches. So you can have no fear about cutting the stems back of a jade plant, because they will always grow back. If you're not too happy with how something is growing, then you can always go back in and cut again. For example, here I made a previous cut just down there, and it's produced this longer stem here and a shorter stem here. So all you want to do is just go in between 2 sets of leaves in the middle, just a nice clean cut like so. These 2 leaves were just below where I made the cut on the stem. You'll get a branch growing here in this direction, the same direction as that leaf, and a branch here on this side as well, growing in the same direction as that leaf. Sometimes a plant is just looking like a lanky beanpole, and who wants that in their home? Cutting it back resets it to grow in a more compact shape. Anything that grows via a stem is perfect for cutting back in this way, and trust me, you're not going to kill it. This plant here is the perfect example of the power of pruning and why you can't kill your plant by cutting it back. So this is a Philodendron verrucosum, a very nice plant, and I cut it right back near enough to the base, right there, and it's now producing a new stem here and a new stem at the base of the plant as well. So I got with me here my Philodendron melanocrisis. So called because the boy is always in crisis. I mean, look at the state of that leaf right there. I don't know what was trying to happen there. But the main problem with this guy is that the space in between the leaf nodes, which are these marks on the stem where there's kind of these weird area roots sprouting out, is quite long. I don't think it should be that long on a melanochrysum. So that suggests that it's maybe suffering from a lack of light, potentially. So when you've got a plant like this, you can just get your pruners out and snip it right back. So I like to leave probably at least one leaf for it to be able to photosynthesize. But when you do make a cut, there's a little growth point there, a little oval green mark, and that's where the new stem will come from. So I could cut it there if I wanted to activate that node, but I still think that's a little bit too lanky. If the new stem was to grow there, it might be a little bit top heavy with this lanky stem piece down here. So I'm gonna go a little bit lower, and I might even go in between. Doesn't need to be too specific, and make the cut. So this plant will be able to photosynthesize, and there'll be a new bud on here somewhere for it to start growing. So a new stem will emerge. The next plant on my chopping hit list is this Peperomia raindrop. As you can see, looking a bit top heavy, a bit wavy, these stems. So they've got quite lanky and tall. And the problem with this plant is that it's losing leaves at the base. But that shouldn't be a problem. I'm gonna cut it right back like so. Because even though there's no leaves on this branch, it still has photosynthesizing potential. So it should activate a new, or hopefully a couple of new growth points lower down for it to branch out and be a nice bushy specimen. So I'm gonna go through without any issues and trim back this bad boy. So you might be kind of shocked, or maybe even crying, sat on the sofa watching me do this, but it is the best thing for the plant. So there's an example there actually where it's branched out kind of by itself. So I've got no worries that this plant is going to branch out. So what about bushy plants like Calafea? Where do you even begin with these? Well, it's not as hard as you might think, and the aim of the game with these guys is to be heavy-handed. Check out Zebby, my Calafea zebrina here. She's got a bunch of leaves that are either yellowing or turning crispy brown. But one option you could do, and it's something I used to recommend on the channel, but I think I'm revising my thinking now. You could find a browning leaf, or a leaf with brown tips, and just cut off around the edge like so, just following the shape of the leaf. So cutting off all the nastiness, and then you're left with a leaf that isn't so brown anymore. But to be honest, I feel like that is kind of papering over the cracks or stemming the tide, because there's clearly something wrong with this leaf. So really, the leaf is just gonna go brown again in the next few weeks anyway. So it's much better to just cut off the entire leaf. Now a Calafea grows bulbs in the soil from which the leaves sprout through the soil. So what you want to do is go right to the base of the soil and just prune it off in its entirety. And here she is. Zebby is looking much healthier now. And the great thing about this is not only are you tidying up the plant, so it looks like you know what you're doing with your plants, it's also kind of opening up the plant. So it's allowing air and light to get into the middle of the plant, and that should make these central leaves a bit healthier as well. I've got a snake plant here that is looking a little bit worse for wear. This plant is not happy because it's got thin, long leaves. So what you can do to get this plant in shape is cut out right at the base of the plant where it's coming out of the soil. Just cut off these narrow leaves like that. You don't want to cut a snake plant leaf in half like that, because you'll be left with a leaf that won't do anything. It won't branch out or grow a new leaf or anything like that. So you want to cut it just below the soil line to kind of hide it, so it tidies up the appearance. Whenever you're pruning a plant, you do want to make sure that it's in pretty good nick. If you start pruning an unhealthy plant or a dry plant, then you're not going to get great results. This guy is nice and healthy, but it does need a bit of a prune back. But I watered it 4 days ago, and that's important for pruning. You just want to make sure that it's a nice, well-watered plant. And there you have it. So I thinned it out nicely, which means that lots of air and light is going to get into the middle of this plant, and it's going to send out brand new leaves that are always much nicer and much healthier. I cut back the stem of this Monstera in the depths of winter, last winter, right here, and it's grown a new stem successfully. So there's a new leaf there, and there's another new leaf on the way. So it does show that you can prune back in winter and you won't kill the plant. Should the plant be a minimum size before we start lobbing its head off? Generally, no. It's actually a great idea to start pruning as early as you can. If you wait too long and let the plant grow tall and lanky like me, then chances are the stems will be thin. Pruning early generally thickens the main stem, which means it can better support top growth. This little thing in here is a J plant. It was a small J plant. There's a cut right back early on, so right down to near the base of the plant. And as you can see, there's a new growth point already emerging there, and there's one further down there, just at the bottom of the stem. So 2 new branches, and eventually they'll grow out, and this stem here at the base will be nice and thick, nice and girthy. So this Ficus elastica teneki is the perfect example of when you make a cut early on a plant, not only does it branch out into 2 new stems, but it also makes the stem nice and girthy. Now you might be worried about cutting too much off, and to that I say they will always grow back. That's the Sheffield May plant's mantra. Unless you cut a plant back so much that there's nothing left, you will be fine. This fella here was my once big and beautiful coleus, but an accident happened with this plant. It wasn't my fault, it was someone else's fault, so I had to cut it right back on all the stems, and it's now starting to shoot out new growth. There's a new stem here, new stem there, basically all over this plant, new stems are emerging. After you've given your little babies the chop, what happens next? Basically, it's dead simple. You just continue to look after your plants as you normally would. So that means giving them a drink when the soil is dry. Don't water them when the soil is already wet. Continue to fertilize as you normally would. And then light. Light is the most important aspect to make sure that these new stems and new leaves arrive. If you haven't got new stems and new leaves after a few weeks or a couple of months or something like that, then it's normally because you haven't given them enough light. I do have a warning to share with you about pruning plants with stems. Well, not so much a warning, but more of an advisory. Moni, my bedroom Monstera, will perfectly illustrate this for us. I showed you the new leaf that emerged after I made the cut. Well, check out the fenestrations compared to the leaf that I cut off. Not as well developed, are they? This normally happens with plants like Monstera and Philodendron. The new leaf that emerges after the cut will be less mature than the one we cut off. It's not a major issue, of course. The new stem will get back to the same maturity after it's pushed out a couple more leaves, but just expect this to happen when you next cut back your Monstera. I've just had this houseplant delivered to my home, and I need to get it in tip-top shape so that it can be living its absolute best life. I'll talk about why crooked leaves like this spell catastrophe, why this will eventually lead to its downfall, and why fertilising him would be a disaster. So there's lots to get into to put this guy right. So this fella is a Monstera, and I've already named him Speckled Jim, and you'll see why in a sec. He's not just any Monstera, no, he's the hipster trendy type, a Monstera Thai constellation. If you're not sure what the difference is, then check out the leaves. White speckles are marbling, hence the name I've christened him with, Speckled Jim. The white speckles gives it the appearance of the starry night sky, and it originated from Thailand, so we end up with Thai constellation. Genius. Anyway, Speckled Jim was introduced to the channel not long ago as part of my unboxing video from Amazon. Yeah, that's right, I got this guy off Amazon. Who knew you could buy exotic rare plants from the world's largest online marketplace, Amazon, and be happy with your purchase? There, I've already given you 2 TV references for you to get your teeth into. The first one, to get them both correct in the comments, will get the admiration you deserve from me and all your peers. Anyway, I highly recommend you check out the video because I was expecting to be delivered a dog. Not literally that is, but I ended up receiving this stallion. Ooh. It's massive. Looks like a plant. This isn't a cutting, is it? This is a fully fledged plant. I'm gushing because this was sold as a rooted cutting for only £50, which is about $75. And as you can see, he's much more than a cutting. He's practically a fully fledged plant. Cuttings don't normally come with 7 leaves and a well-established root system after all. So I got a bargain. But that doesn't mean there aren't a few things that need sorting out to make Speckled Jim happy. The first thing you should always check when you've just bought a Monstera, or even if you're in the shop ready to part with your hard-earned money, is to check how many plants you've actually got. Most of the time there will be at least 2 or 3 individual plants in there, and this can present a problem or two. First, having more than one plant in the same pot means that things will get pretty crowded in there pretty quickly. Monsteras tend to have large, chunky, ramen-like roots and they grow like wildfire, so having more than one in the pot won't be ideal. And second, it's going to be much more difficult to train your dragon to climb up a support, and supporting your Monstera will be the best thing you can do for it. I'll show you why this is a problem when I get to supporting Speckled Jim here later in the video. So how can you tell how many plants you've actually got? Luckily, this is dead simple because Monsteras only grow a single dominant vine with leaves shooting off it. As you can see, Speckled Jim is a singleton. If he was married with kids, you'd see more than one stem coming from the soil. If he was cohabiting the pot, then I'd be forcing him to divorce by potting them all into separate pots. Luckily though, I won't have to inflict that trauma on our Speckled Jim here. Now the first thing I noticed when I got this bad boy out of the box was the leaves, and I'm not talking about how beautiful they are. Obviously I noticed that too, but there are a couple of other things that caught my attention. My Inspector Clouseau senses tell me that Jim has been living in a spot that gets good light, which is great. The leaves are big, well fenestrated, and even have perforations in the middle of the latest leaf, all hallmarks of a plant soaking up the rays on a sun lounger. But looking at the plant from the front, you'll notice that all the leaves are facing any which way, and this is something that needs correcting. This suggests to me that Speckled Jim has been moved around a lot, or light has been coming in from all sorts of different angles, so we didn't know whether it was coming or going, the poor fella. It's my belief that a Monstera, as well as any other climbing plant for that matter, looks so much better when facing in one direction. And to achieve that, the light needs to shine on him from one source and be constant. I mean, check out the petioles on this leaf. Doing the twist and shout, isn't it? And a sure sign the light source has been moving around like no one's business. Compare that to Mickey, my other younger Monstera that I've kept facing the light in the same direction since he was conceived, and you can see just how crooked Jim is. And I hate the way Jim's leaves face up as if the light was shining right down on him from directly above. The leaves should always be facing forward like Mickey here. Anyway, all of this can be corrected. It just needs me to pick a spot in my home and leave him alone, and you'll see where I pick later. The leaves should eventually start to all face the same way. When Jim first arrived, one of the first things I did was check out his private parts. Don't worry, it was consensual, I think. Anyway, it's always a great idea to check the health of the roots of any new plant before going any further. It's the engine room to the ship after all. Is there anything black and mushy that needs sorting out? If this is the case and it's a new plant, then I'd send it back. The seller shouldn't be selling anything with rotting roots. And then, is it significantly root bound? Luckily for us, Speckled Jim was in pretty darn good shape. Absolutely nothing to worry about with the roots. A cheeky little tip from me is that a Monstera can afford to be a little root bound. In fact, if a Monstera has tons of room to spread its wings, or toes I guess, then that's exactly what it will do. Grow roots like a madman and kind of forget about the leaves. This just means new leaves take longer to come out. So I wouldn't normally repot a Monstera straight from the store, but in this case you'll notice that Jim doesn't have anything to lean onto, and I want to correct this. So yes, the best Monsteras out there have a support system to help them grow big and strong. It's how they grow in the wild after all, and we should always mimic their natural growth habit as much as possible in our homes. They latch onto surrounding trees in the jungle with their aerial roots and hoist themselves higher up the jungle to get a better view of the sun. And this is exactly what we should help them do. Grow vertically rather than horizontally. You can support with anything you like as long as it's sturdy enough to support the plant. Lee at Kill This Plant uses tree trunks and his monsteras are the best in the business. I tried using bamboo sticks for Molly the Monster in my bedroom, and to be honest, it's not really working out. Much too flimsy. So for Speckled Jim here, I'm going to use a moss pole. Now this is a great idea for any monstera because once the plant starts climbing up, it will grow its area roots into the moss and strengthen itself in the process. This turns your plant from spotty teenager to fully fledged responsible adult much quicker than without one. The result? Bigger and bigger leaves with more and more fenestrations, and who doesn't love that, right? As you can see though, the only problem is that the stem is already hanging out the side of the pot, so it's going to be tricky to get the plant and the moss pole all in the same pot. Let's make up the moss pole first and then see how we get on. Now I like to use plastic cages I buy from Amazon, and it's just a case of filling it with sphagnum moss from Cybertanica. The beauty of these is that they can easily be stacked to keep up with Speckled Jim's growth. So where does the moss pole need to go? Basically on Jim's backside. A monstera stem will have a front and a back. The front is where the leaves face and the back is where the aerial roots are. The aim of the game is to stick the pole up against the back so that the roots can grow into the moss and Jim can grow vertically. Look, you can see a couple of the aerial roots have already started growing into the soil. Right, let's pull Jim's trousers down and expose his private parts. The soil he's been living in seems pretty decent, but I want to upgrade him to a chunkier aroid mix specifically for monsteras from Cybertanica. I use my 10% discount code when buying this mix, and you can too by following the link in the description to this video. I've nabbed a slightly bigger pot so that I can hopefully fit the moss pole and the plant in, but honestly it's going to be a tight squeeze for our Jim. But the beauty of moss poles is that once the roots start to grow into it, the root ball at the base of the plant becomes a little less significant. Basically, the pole becomes an extension of the pot, so root growth in the pot should slow down. That's the theory anyway. So I'm putting the pole at the back of the pot and plonking Jim's behind right up against it. The area roots up against the pole and the leaves are facing away. This is important. As you can see, it's a bit tricky to fit everything in. Plus, Jim is kind of lurching forwards a bit, but this should hopefully correct itself once he's settled in and facing the light properly. We backfill the pot now and make sure everything is nice and snug, and then give everything a thorough drink. Watering deeply like this is important to settle the soil around the roots. Don't skimp here. Right, I've got another crucial tip for you that will stop you killing your new plant before you've even had a chance to start enjoying him. This doesn't just apply to monsteras, but any plant. You'll no doubt know that to get your Popeye to go all muscly and hyped up, you need to give him his tin of spinach. Don't worry, no spinach is required. That's just a weird analogy for giving your plants some fertilizer. I give all my plants Houseplant Focus by Growth Technology whenever they're growing, and it sure does make them sing. But there is a warning here. Never give a new plant fertilizer for at least a couple of months. Never. Sorry mate, you're going on a fast for 60 days. Don't argue with me, it's for your own good. The crux of it is this. I have no idea when Speckled Jim's last meal was and what it was either. He could have been given slow release pellets in the soil last week. If I was to top him up with yet more, he'll turn into the whale in no time. And you know what that means, don't you? These gloriously green leaves with white speckles will turn yellow. Yellow enough for me to get the Sheffield Made Plants bin out again. So that's Jim pretty much all set up now. The last step is to find a spot in my home that gets bright light and leave him to do his thing there. Which is a bugger because getting high light in my home is near enough impossible thanks to my climate. So this means he'll be spending his days under this Sansi grow bulb I've got plugged into this lamp. And I use my 15% discount here too when buying this bad boy, and you could do the same by going you know where. Make sure you check out Speckled Jim's first appearance on the channel by following the link here, and I'll see you next time.